Well, good morning. I'm going to get started here because I know we've got an hour before lunch. I'm going to get you out on time. I had a couple of my colleagues ask while I was presenting on the password, "Are you going to fill up an hour talking about that?" I said, well, actually, I had to cut things down to keep it to an hour. Walking out the door this weekend, I told my wife that I was presenting on. Eye roll, said, "Oh, have fun with that." So I know it's not the sexiest topic, but my goal is to convince you that this is an hour well spent, worth your time. We're going to talk. What I want you to get out of this is historically talking about passwords before they were called passwords. I'm going to use the word password probably interchangeably with codes and ciphers that just for illustration purposes, talk about the history of that, talk about some of the things going on in the present, and then some possibilities about what the password might become or what it could look like in the future. So to get started with this, just again, real simple, I want to break it down to the basics. The password is simply a transaction. It's a proof of identity. In exchange for something of value, at least something that somebody considers of value. Whether that's information, whether that's for peace or a passage to safety. We're going to talk about cryptography and the writing and solving of codes, coming from the Greek words cryptos, meaning hidden, secret, and graphene, to write. Now, whenever I was doing research for this, and by the way, this is a version of a presentation I did for my leadership team over the summer at a retreat where we introduced a password manager. So I guess I should probably give you a disclaimer that there's going to be a commercial by me for a password manager towards the second half of this presentation. And I did this part to kind of set the stage for them to get buy-in from them and tried to keep it a little light and informative. So the first thing when I thought about, well, what is it that I want to talk about from the past, I kind of went through, did some research and listed a number of ciphers and codes in history. And I ran into, after I had that list, I ran into this documentary, I think that was made for National Treasure, the Nicolas Cage movie in 10 years ago or so. And it's 10 minutes long, so it's longer than I like, but it covers everything that I wanted to talk from a historical perspective. Covers all of that except for two examples. So you want to sit back and listen to this.
Will somebody please explain to me what these magic numbers are?
Each of these numbers corresponds to a word and a key. It's a clue. We are one step closer.
Cryptology is the science of secret communications. It has two parts. One is cryptography, and one is cryptanalysis, and the two together become cryptology.
I think everybody in every society has secrets. So you have generals having their cipher secretaries, you have monarchs having their cipher secretaries, you have accountants having their own systems for encryption. So everybody and anybody has used codes for thousands of years.
There's always a war between the code makers and the code breakers.
The history of cryptography is a development of ideas, but it's also a development of technology. So to start with, people have pen and paper, and that's what they use to encrypt messages. The most basic system of cryptography, the one that dates back the longest time, is swapping one letter for a different letter. A swap with B, B swap with Z, and so on.
A cipher is a way to conceal information In a cipher, you exchange one letter with another letter. One of the first cipher systems that we know about is called Abbash. It's a system that was used in the Bible, and it's used by taking the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and reversing them.
Even Julius Caesar had a cipher, which we now associate with him, something called the Caesar cipher. And what the Caesar cipher involves is shifting every letter down in two places. A becomes C, B becomes D, C becomes E, and so on.
It was a simple code, but it was good enough to defeat people. Of course, nobody was doing code breaking in those days.
For centuries, nobody could crack that type of code. Because when you look at the encoded message, it looks like gobbledygook. It's an array of randomly assigned letters. The secrecy of an encryption system is not the system itself, but rather the way the system is used. So your job as a code breaker is to work out how the letters were arranged so you can decipher the way that that cipher was implemented. The chap who broke that code was an Arabic mathematician called Al-Kindi. And what he worked out was that every letter has a certain frequency. In English, that frequency means that E is the most common letter, followed by T and then A, and then there are lots of common ones like M and N and R and S, and then the rare ones were Q and Z and X.
I've done a bunch of ciphers in my life and eventually recognized what kind of cipher was being used based on frequency counts.
This process known as frequency analysis blew apart the substitution cipher, and it meant that code makers had to invent something new, something better.
The Masons used a cipher called the Pigpen cipher.
The Freemasons' Pigpen cipher is a very simple cipher. You start off by just drawing some grids. So this is what we might call the Pigpen. For these grids on the right, you're going to put dots. And you write the letters in all the grids. Now, if I want to encrypt a letter, let's say I want to encrypt the letter A, well, what I do is I look for A in the grid. So it's enclosed by this sort of backwards L shaped. So A becomes a backwards L. K, well, that's in a kind of U shape. To distinguish the K from the B, which is also in a U shape, we do a U with a dot in it. That's why the dots have been important, and so on. So typically, an encrypted message will look like lots of V's with dots or squares or angles and so on. That's the Pigpen cipher.
Many of our founding fathers knew quite a bit about cryptography.
During the American Revolution, both sides used codes, both the Americans and the British. So they used couriers, and they delivered these messages. But couriers were sometimes waylaid, the messages were intercepted, they were in code. But there were a number of people on the American side who were able to solve some of these messages. And there was one man named James Lovell, who was the first man in American history to do successful solutions. He revealed to George Washington what the British fleet was planning to do, and thus enabled George Washington to set the final seal on the victory of the American Revolution. Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, was also the father of American code making.
He invented something called a Jefferson wheel.
This is it, this elegant little device which the Army called the M94. And this system was used by the United States Army from 1922 until about the middle of World War II, when it was replaced by mechanical, more rapid devices. Codes became important in history for the first time in World War I with radio interception. Radio has the great advantage of communicating very rapidly from one to another, but radio has the disadvantage that every message you send can be intercepted by the enemy. In World War I, for the first time, a number of events occurred which showed generals that code breaking and radio intelligence was important.
One of the most important cipher messages of all time was the Zimmerman telegram, which was broken by the British and led directly to the U.S. coming into the war.
In January of 1917, the German foreign minister said to Mexico, listen, we're going to start sinking a lot of ships. The United States may come into the war, and if this happens, we want you to join us in the war, and when we win that war, you will get back the territories that you lost in 1848, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Well, when this message was intercepted by the British and given to the Americans, and President Wilson made it public, the country exploded. 6 weeks, rather, after this message was made public by Wilson, the United States declared war, bringing the United States into World War I, onto the world stage. The Zimmerman telegram, there it may well have changed the course of history.
In World War II, there were a lot of machine ciphers used. The most important was the Enigma machine, which carried all the German diplomatic traffic, and our breaking that was incredibly important.
The Germans were confident that the Enigma could never be broken. They had set up a good number of precautions about it. The U-boats kept their keys to the Enigma, the position of the rotor wheels, on a water-soluble piece of paper with water-soluble ink. So if the U-boat went down and was captured, the ink would run and you would not be able to see what the code keys were.
When the Enigma was broken by the Poles, who then transmitted their information to the British were able to start producing Enigma decryptions on a daily basis, almost in real time.
What we've got here is a genuine Enigma cipher machine as used in the Second World War by the German military. It looks like a typewriter, but what's different is it's got a lamp board up here. The lamp board lights up letters as you type in letters. If I type in the letter E, the letter S has lit up. So E is encrypted as S. When I type in E again, a different letter has lit up. This time it's the letter D. If we look inside, we see these three rotors. The wiring from the 26 letters goes through these rotors before it reaches the lamps. And each time I type in a letter, the rotors move. Depending on how these rotors are set up, the messages are encoded and decoded differently.
Perhaps Britain's greatest achievement in the 20th century, to solve these codes, to use them to save lives, to shorten the war, and to help win World War II.
After the Second World War, you have even more.
Okay, so I mentioned that covered all but two.
This probably looks like gibberish to you.
That covered all but two of the examples that I wanted to talk about. And I don't consider myself a history buff by any stretch of the imagination, but I found myself as I was doing research into this topic, I was really engrossed at some of these really cool, unique, what I thought were clever ways of decrypting messages. And one of these other examples I wanted to share was the Spartan Sky-Tilly cipher, where, I don't know if that's really coming through or not, but where there was a cylinder wrapped on parchment paper, where one side would write the message out, give it to a courier, so that message just become one long string parchment paper, right, with words indecipherable. So if the messenger caught, the bad guys, the other side, would not only have to know how to decipher it, but the diameter of that baton or whatever it was that they were wrapped around it also had to match. Otherwise, the letters wouldn't match up to spell the words that they were trying to send out. Wow, you know, ancient Sparta, pretty clever idea. But my favorite example is from World War II, and I think this actually started in World War I, but once this got declassified in the 60s, the war in the Pacific, the Navajo code talkers, I think, really got started finally to get a lot of recognition. And what fascinates me about this is the way the United States used the Navajo Indians and their language to transmit information to other places around the battle. So the Navajo language itself is unwritten. So you don't write down when you're communicating in Navajo. It's purely spoken. It's complex, but yet it's spoken in a way that the information can be clearly transmitted into the field quickly and efficiently. To the point where the Navajo code could translate 3 lines of English in 20 seconds. That the encryption machines that were being talked about in that video at that time during World War II took 30 minutes to translate that same 3 lines of English code. And the beauty of the Navajo code was it was simple word association. So one word in the Navajo language was assigned to a military phrase or a key word on the battlefield or different tactics. So an example would be on the left is the English word, in the center column is the equivalent in Navajo. But remember, this was a code, it wasn't just literal Navajo. So if the Japanese would have captured or found somebody that spoke Navajo, and that individual tried to translate this message, the literal translation for Navajo is on the right. So I picturing in my mind the message of there's a battleship 5 knots out, and the translation would come back to the equivalent of there's a whale 5 knots out. So I thought, wow, that's just a really cool way to cipher, to have a cipher that wasn't broken, wasn't decrypted for World War II, and again was given credit for the winning the Pacific Theater out there. So those are historical examples I wanted to share. So let's talk about the present. We have, well, actually, I'm going to say we have a love-hate relationship. Maybe we have a hate-hate relationship with passwords. I don't know. But there are some really good examples of how we're using randomization. We're going to talk about why being random is the key to creating secure ciphers or passwords. The one cool example I wanted to share was from a company called Cloudflare. And that is responsible. There's a whole bunch of the internet that goes through Cloudflare services to help keep it secure, the internet secure. And I was really enthralled with the way that they were creating random numbers.
Computers aren't very good at picking random numbers. Every part of a computer is designed to be predictable and follow logical patterns. You put the same numbers in, you're going to get the same numbers out, which is a problem because all modern encryption, including that padlock up in your browser that tells you that you're safe, all of that relies on big, properly random numbers. If you can somehow predict those numbers, you can start breaking those locks, which is why I'm here at the headquarters of Cloudflare in San Francisco.
Cloudflare is a service that protects websites and web services and sort of sits in front of them as a gatekeeper. Somewhere around 10% of the web flows through Cloudflare's network. Cloudflare was one of the first companies to provide free SSL encryption for websites. So the connection between your web browser and the website you're going to is fully encrypted and invisible for eavesdroppers to be able to look at.
In short, these folks deal with a lot of encrypted internet traffic, so they need a lot of random numbers. It is possible to write code that will simulate randomness, and that's good enough for a lot of uses, but in theory, those numbers could be predicted. They're just being generated by code. So the servers here have to get their randomness from an external and entirely unpredictable source. A lot of home computers treat their own users as sources of randomness. Tiny twitches of mouse movements, the exact milliseconds between keystrokes, or on a phone, maybe even the accelerometer or other sensors. In all those cases, they generally discard the bigger parts, the bits that could just be influenced by humans, and go off to tiny little decimal places, the bits that you couldn't control precisely even if you wanted to. But that sort of human interaction is nowhere near enough for an operation on this scale, hence lava lamps.
We videotape these lava lamps and take the pictures and the video and turn it into a stream of random, unpredictable bytes. And this unpredictable data is what we use to help create the keys that encrypt the traffic that flow through Cloudflare's network. This data is then fed into our data centers and then fed into the Linux kernel, which then uses it to help seed random number generators that are used to generate keys. Every time that you take a picture with a camera, there's going to be some sort of static, some sort of noise. So it's not only just where the bubbles are flowing through the lava lamp, it's sort of the state of the air, the sort of ambient light. Every tiny change impacts the stream of data. A cryptographic hash function is something that we use where even if you have one sort of static image and one little bit changes, it changes the entire stream. So we use that to help scatter the randomness as much as possible. We also collect randomness around the world. So in our London office, we have this thing called a chaotic pendulum. It has 3 pieces, and it's unpredictable in which way they kind of twist and turn together. We videotape that and feed it into our randomness source as well. In our Singapore office, we have a radioactive source that we use to feed into the randomness system as well. So this is not just some stunt that we pulled. It's actually being fed into our real systems.
Whether anything in the world is truly random is arguably a question of philosophy and not science. Maybe everything is just complicated clockwork, but these lava lamps are so chaotic that simulating that camera shot with perfect pixel accuracy, far enough ahead to be useful, while figuring out everything else those images are being put through, it's roughly the same level of difficulty as just brute forcing the encryption in the first place. And even if you could simulate all that, you'd only have one piece of the puzzle. These folks aren't the first to do this. LavaRand was patented by a company called Silicon Graphics in 1996, but that only lasted a couple of years. Now, of course, there are less flashy and more practical ways to generate random numbers, but then I wouldn't be here. I would be at some other company who'd gone and, I don't know, pointed a camera at a basket of kittens. That'd be a bit higher maintenance, though.
So while that's not directly talking about passwords, it's talking about encryption. And we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But going back to our topic,
computer
passwords. And when I said we have a love-hate or hate-hate relationship with passwords, the guy that invented the computer password is even quoted in this Business Insider article. It says that he admits that the computer password has become a nightmare. He actually passed away a couple years ago. But I thought, wow, it's not just me, it's not just us. The guy that even invented it said, oh, we've got a problem. I did a Google search earlier this month for the phrase password sanity and came back with 8.95 million results. So again, I think there's something to this idea that we're going crazy with trying to use passwords, why we're using it, how we're using them, and so on. And if that wasn't enough to convince you, maybe my friend Tabascus can help with it.
Websites. When I'm typing a password into you, could you tell me it has to have a capital, a lowercase, and a number so I don't just start guessing? Because I have a lot of passwords, and I don't guess my capital, lowercase, number password until like the 7th password try. And by that time, there's already a fraud alert on my account, so I have to go through 3 new layers of security based on questions that you asked me 6 years ago, and I don't know the answers to anymore. What's your favorite gumdrop? Purple or periwinkle? What? So then I go to change my password to what I want it to be, and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, your password has to have a capital, lowercase, and a number. Oh, why didn't you tell me that? I have one capital, lowercase, number password. That's the one it is. So then I go to change it to my one capital, lowercase, number password, and it says, new password must not have been used in the past year. Which means that's what it just was, you idiot. Make a new one. Good luck remembering it, person who already obviously has trouble in this field. God dang it! iTunes does this. Stop it. American Express does it. Stop it. GoDaddy does it. No, Daddy. Stop it, Daddy. No! Not you, Griffin. Not you. No, you're not a daddy. Not yet. He's fixed. And if my password is wrong, why would I want to remember it, Firefox? I can't even get into my account. Why do I want you to remember my not password? I don't! And then I get my password right, but I get the captcha wrong. Because I can't tell what that says. Right? When did captchas become a puzzle-solving video game? Are you human? I don't know anymore, because I can't pass the human test. Is that human letters? I want to set my password to whatever I want. Let me be the judge how protected my password is. Don't make me put numbers in there, or capitals, or punctuation. You have to have an emoticon in there that reflects your mood at the time of signing. Why do they do this? Are people suing Wells Fargo? Because they're like, oh, my username was username, and my password was password, and I lost $1 million. Wells Fargo's like, oh, crap, we should probably tighten our security. Let's make them specify what type of granny apple they like. Ones that are green or ones that are yellow mixed with blue. Let's make them answer that, and that's how they get in. That's how they get in. I own Wells Fargo. And also, security questions. Don't make me pick from your default question. I don't know what street I lived on in 1997. I don't know. Who's your favorite teacher? I don't know. I had a lot of freaking cool ones. I never picked a favorite. What kind of freaking Jell-O do you like the most? I don't know. And there's not an other category sometimes. Where's the other box? I'm sorry for complaining. I just wanted to get that off my chest. There it is. Breathe it in. Don't. It's probably carcinogenic. If you have a similar situation, post it in the comments. That's all we wanted to say. Thanks for listening, liking me, love me, save me. He's terrible.
So, why do we have to do those things? Why is it the process so arduous? Well, we're going to geek out a little bit and talk about ways to crack passcode, and it's that cat and mouse game, and why certain strategies work for a certain time, and then we've got to do something different, make things more secure, and so on and so forth. One of the basic ones is a dictionary or brute force attack, and it's probably hard to read, but that's what it sounds like. It's going through words in a dictionary and just brute force over and over and over again, trying to come up with the correct combination of username and passwords. That obviously, if you think about how you get locked out of your account after X number of incorrect passwords, or you have your device wiped if you don't unlock it correctly after 10 times, or whatever the setting is, those are ways around preventing this kind of attack. This infographic's a couple years old, so the numbers probably aren't exact, but I thought this was a great characterization of the amount of time it can take just using the brute force dictionary method of cracking passwords, whether you have a 7 or 8 character length of your password up to a 10, 11, a 12 character password, and how those incremental changes of an additional character can change the difficulty of cracking that. Another attack is a rainbow attack. That introduces a concept of hashing, and the Cloudflare video, the guy briefly mentioned it, where a hash of a password is it's an algorithm, so it's a defined calculation of taking a value of a password and turning it into what I call a fingerprint. So you notice on the left the letter A and tree, and this is a house. Those values all are hashed into a fixed length string that's really nonsense. So it looks random, it looks very difficult, and the way hashing works from a website perspective is when you create your account, your password is not stored in a system, it's stored as a hash. So the plain text password is never written to a computer. When you log in, you enter your password, it generates a hash, and it checks against the hash that's stored in the database of that system. If it matches, you get access. The problem with hashing is that that algorithm is applied in a consistent manner. So if my password is 123456 and your password is 123456, that hash is identical. So anytime that something is predictable, I mentioned this earlier, when it's predictable, when there's a pattern, it can be defeated. So the key in passwords is, well, how can we make them unpredictable where there's no pattern, and it makes it harder to do. That's where salting comes in. And I know when we talk about hashing and salting right before lunch, it's probably not the best thing to think about, but bear with me. Because when you salt a hash, you're creating a random value that's assigned to that hash. So every input creates a unique value. So when it makes the hash looks non-deterministic, not predictable, no pattern, it's hard to defeat. So at the bottom is a hash of hello with that long string. If that's obviously a bad password, but that's my password. Salting takes that random number or that random value before it, combines it with the hello hash, and spits out that value on the right. If your password is also hello, it takes a hash with a completely different randomized value and assigns it. And when that hash is salted, it comes out with a completely different string. So I'm not going to say that taking the hashing and salting combined is enough to make a secure password that can't be defeated, but it would be harder to get that information. So that brings me to the commercial part of the presentation, where I'm going to talk about LastPass. That's the password manager that we've chosen in our district that I rolled out this year to my leadership team and tech staff, and then we have a few other key positions around the district that we're using that with. The reason that I ended up choosing LastPass, I've been using it for about 5 years, and the reason I chose it was because they were breached. And I said that to the leadership team, I said that to my tech staff, and the response was always, like, you're choosing a product because it was breached. Well, because when I read about the breach, I read, yeah, they got stuff out of LastPass, but the bad guys couldn't make sense of it because it was just blobs of data. It was salted and hashed in such a way that, so if I was using it, they could have gotten my password, but couldn't make sense of what that data was. I thought, well, that's, when we think about security, privacy, it comes down to trust, and you've got to put your trust in somebody. I don't trust my human brain and memory to remember different passwords for every site that I log into and make them long and strong and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided I got to put my trust in somebody. When I read about this, I'm like, I think I can get behind that philosophy. And I did some more digging and found out that LastPass itself does upwards of 105,000 cryptographic operations on your master password. And those operations, I'll show you in a minute, that run at various stages. Good so far. So the attacker would need to know a lot of information in order to make sense and get anything of value out of your account. So I'm not going to go through this, but this is LastPass's zero knowledge security model. I just want to point out that your master password is the key, that's the key that unlocks everything you put in LastPass. Has anybody used LastPass, by the way? Yeah, alright, so I might actually be preaching to the choir a little bit here. So feel free to zone out for the next couple of minutes if you need to. But you enter your create your master password. That alone, I don't know what PDKDF2 hashing is. It's some kind of hashing algorithm, but it does 5,000 rounds of that. Before it even goes into LastPass, it does an authentication hash, and then once it gets into LastPass, there's additional hashing goes on. So again, I look at that and say, LastPass can't tell what any of my passwords are. They can't give that information to anybody else. I hold the key, and I alone hold the key to my master password. Again, that's a security model that I can get behind. So these next couple slides are actually from LastPass, so you have to bear with me. I'm just going to kind of click through them. But your vault is your command central. So those of you who are not LastPass users, you can store beyond just websites. You can store notes in there. You can store form fills, you can share. One of the big reasons that that we went with an enterprise subscription at Spring Grove was because we can share securely accounts. So, a perfect example, if one of my staff, if we're using LastPass, one of my staff member leaves, and I've shared network passwords to all of our systems, and we've got to go through and change all them, well, I can share in LastPass in such a way that I don't have to give him or her access to the password, but he or she can still log into that site. And so it was a valuable way for me to say, hey, this can be a time saver, both on the front end, but also on the back end whenever we have personnel changes. So the first thing you do whenever you set up LastPass account, and they have a free, again, for those who don't use it, they have a free tier that gives you a lot of access to a lot of the features. You set up a password that's long, obviously, that's strong, that's unique, uses passphrases ideally. One of the nice things about LastPass is that it works across all operating systems, Mac, Linux, Windows, iOS, Android. If you're in a browser, you can download the extension, so you're not logging into your vault all the time. You're just accessing those sites from the browser extension. It's quick and easy to install. You log in, and what I told folks as we were starting to use this was, rather than go through your entire list, however you're keeping your passwords now, whether it's on a spreadsheet or it's in the system or wherever, rather than taking the time to transfer them, just start using LastPass, and as you come to a website and you start to log in, LastPass will pop up and say, hey, I noticed you just logged in, do you want to add this to your vault? Yes, as you're using your password there, you can organize it if you want into different folders. But that's a way just to start, like, over time building that your LastPass vault. If you want, you can also add passwords manually. Or you can put the URL, give it your own name, username, and password. Notes, in the notes field is where I put those security questions that we all have to answer, that I never, by the way, answer truthfully. So I have silly answers to those questions that I'm not going to remember, so I put those in the notes field of those accounts. Go through here. I have, just from these aren't my accounts, these are from LastPass, but I have, just to give you the idea of the level of trust that I'm putting in LastPass, beyond my passwords, the secure notes, I have social security numbers of my family members, because other than mine, the only time I need their social security is like now when I'm doing taxes. I always have to go to our physical vault and get out the social security card. Didn't have them stored anywhere else. Put that in there. Credit card information. Basically, I'm putting a lot of my own stuff in here, both personal and professional. Trusting LastPass to keep that secure. This is the sharing folders, is how you can share websites. It's going to be difficult to see, but up here is where I can set, whenever I invite people to a folder, I can set whether they have read-only access, I can give them administrative access, or I can give them access, but hide the password. And again, that was one of the key things when I thought we're going to roll this out. I think this is a really good product to use. That was useful right away. We had our HR director, her assistant left, and she's like, man, if I would have just had this like a month earlier, I wouldn't have had to go through and change all the social media accounts to a different password. So best practices when you're creating that master password, it's got to be unique. That's a password that shouldn't be used anywhere else, any other system, any other time in your life. And like I said, you just go about your day doing business with that extension. You can add passwords as you go. And the mobile app, at least for iOS, it works well filling in, but I haven't had as much success when it comes to adding new accounts from the mobile app, but it's a piece of cake from the browser extension. LastPass has a password generator, so you don't have to create your own. You can have it create it for you. You can set the parameters, the length, and it'll generate and fill it in for you. And the other nice feature I like about LastPass was, and I don't think it's the only product that does this, but you can link personal accounts with your enterprise account. So I have, which I do. So if or when the time comes for me to sever my employment by the district, hopefully on my terms, by the way, that we go, I can remove that account from my personal account, from the district account, and all my personal accounts I still retain. It's not like I have to go through and export them, and there's policies you can set to even prevent that in the enterprise side. But I don't need to export. I have my personal accounts and my district accounts stay in the district enterprise side. So, what does it look like what do passwords look like in the future? Short answer, I don't know. But I felt better whenever I read an article from Villanova University where they asked the question to some experts and said, what are your thoughts about the future of passwords? A director from Threat Research, I don't know what that company is, Direct Research, Total Defense Incorporated, but it sounds pretty good. He says passwords are likely to be with us forever. A guy from Internet Biometric Security Systems says, within 10 years they'll be gone. And somebody else at LifeLock, I do know that company, says passwords may never go away completely. So I would submit to you that the future is murky when it comes to passwords, but there are some options. And these aren't necessarily future options. These are options that are out there today, but I think may become more prevalent in the future, from two-factor, multi-factor authentication services to biometrics, to the hardware two-factor authentication piece like YubiKey, where it's a piece of hardware that you plug in to your device that acts as a two-factor. If that device is detected, the site's not going to log you in. I tried one of those a while ago and worked really well, but it's not something that I found myself going back to at this point very often. I read about this concept of a zero login that I wanted to share that I thought was interesting, because it's something I hadn't considered before. How can a website recognize you without entering password, without giving it a code of some sort? What information can it be given that can still authenticate us? Well, it's our behavior. And this is where I think we have to be careful between that security and convenience side and the erosion of privacy. I'm not saying that this is bad by any means, but as I was reading about using my behavior as a way to authenticate me, I realized that that also means that I'm giving that service, those sites, more information about things like where you access the application. In LastPass, you can limit, by geography, IP addresses of where somebody can log in, when you typically log in, how you swipe your device, how you type on a keyboard, how hard you press, how many mistakes you make, patterns that are unique to you. And the key to this, I think, is that the site service has got to collect enough information to be able to normalize your behavior from the bad guys or the person that's trying to get into your account, whoever that may be. So that's something I'm personally going to keep an eye on. Some other possibilities are voice biometrics. I just realized like a month or two ago that the Alexa we have in our kitchen is now asking whether it wants to distinguish between my voice and my wife's voice. I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool. No, I never really thought about that as a way of authentication based on voice and how different our voices are. This Fingo Pay is a product that's in use in England in our friends across the pond, where it's using vein recognition, so going beyond just your fingerprint, thumbprint, but scanning the veins in your finger. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I thought that was an interesting possibility. Blockchain and out-of-band authentication, where you have one action leads to another action. Where when I try to log into, I try to log into a site in my bank or something, and that triggers an action on their end to verify that it's me, whether it's by code or SMS is the best option there, but maybe it's a phone call that they're calling me to make sure that that I am in fact trying to log into this. That would be an out-of-band authentication. But I'll leave you with one final thought, that if all else fails, none of those other things turn out to happen, I think we can at least fall back on Ellen and take her.
Last night I was flipping around through the channels and I saw this. I really love infomercials. I don't know if you love them as much as I do, but I found one. It's a new product that I want to share with you. And, you know, if you have a hard time remembering your online passwords, a lot of people have a lot of different passwords. This is going to solve your problems.
Online passwords, there's just too many. And who can remember all those tricky combinations? So you stick them on your monitor or you hide them in a drawer. But not anymore. Introducing Password Minder, the personal logbook that takes the hassle out of passwords. Forget about sticky notes or scraps of paper, because Password Minder has been specifically designed to organize and safely store passwords. You'll find them in an instant and never lose a password again, guaranteed. Need to make a password? Just add it to your Password Minder. The alphabetical listing organizes all your usernames and passwords for instant recall and easy reference.
I don't have to worry anymore about security or identity theft. I now have all my passwords in one place. It's free.
If you have passwords, you need Password Minder. So call now and get your very own Password Minder book for just $10.
That's real. That's real. Wait, you're telling me I can keep all my passwords in one place? In this right here, and it's only $10? For half the price, you could write all your passwords on a $5 bill. This is insane. Does this seem safe to keep all your passwords in one place? In a place that's labeled Internet Password Minder? I don't think they thought this through fully. I mean, what if someone gets their hands on your password minder? So I came up with this. It is Ellen's Internet Password Minder Protector, and what you do, you put it in here, you close it, and then it has a built-in combination lock right there, you see on the side, and I know you're thinking, Ellen, what if I forget my combination? Well, if you order now, I will include this, you can put it in there. It's the Password Minder Protector Minder. It's the one place to keep your Password Minder Protector combination. And I have one more special offer. If you don't feel like writing down your passwords, send them to me. And for $10, I'll write them down for you. Don't worry about sending me your credit card information. I'll figure it out. Oh my God, can you believe that?
Your time. I hope this was not as bad as not as awful a presentation as some may think based on the title, and certainly my wife thought when I told her. So that's my contact information. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference. And and I will put, if you're interested, I'll put this up on the PNC website if I don't forget tonight. So if you're interested, feel free to download it or contact me with questions. Pardon? Who's that?